around with a Don42 scenario. So it takes place in the same battlefield as the Blue 42 scenario, but it starts in November of 1942. The Germans are in Stalingrad and pretty much overextended into the Caucasus when the Soviets began launching counteroffensives, notably Operation Uranus around Stalingrad. Now, this scenario actually takes place all the way up here, north of Voronezh, down the lines, and all the way south into the Caucasus and the Transcaucasus. But for purposes of this demo, I'm just going to focus on this area here where the main part of the Soviet counteroffensive was originally launched. So let's take a look at that and see what's going to happen. Put this panel up. We could do free Axis setup. We could do free Soviet setup, but we're going to skip those. Go ahead and begin with the Soviet surprise turn. As usual, I'm not going to devote a whole lot of attention to finding the absolute best attacks, the best odds, the best units. This is just a demo to show how things work. So I'm not going to be the most brilliant general ever. So weather for the surprise turn is always frost in zone C, mud in D, and clear in G. And that seemed to be the best way to get things going. So we'll go ahead and close that, start the Soviet surprise turn. Let's get this situated a little bit better so we can see what's going on. And as we start the surprise movement phase for the Soviets, and we'll click down here and see if we can't bring these guys up around to here. I think the Romanians could be in for a rough time. Let's see, so we'll go here and here, here. Here we've got this. Let's see, maybe we'll bring in somebody from here. Let's bring in a tank brigade to reinforce that. And let's see what's happening here. We've got a little bit more room. Let's bring in artillery brigade to reinforce these guys. Oh, did I miscalculate that? It looks like I did. So it's telling us that we have an overstack. So let's see what happens if we say cancel that move. And now that overstacked unit went back out of there. What did I do? Rocket. Oh, yeah, I guess that's it. We're full up. So up here, I think these German units are going to be too strong to attack, especially across this major river. I think it's pretty much hopeless. But let's see what we can do against these guys here. We can see they have 8 defensive factors, so we can probably do some damage on that hex. So here we have a 221. So let's bring up all of these guys into this hex and clear that. Let's see what's happening here. We have a 201. So let's bring up all of these guys into that hex. And here we have a 302. We can probably bring up, yeah, let's bring up some tank brigades from here. All right, so that'll probably do some damage against this. If we look over here, yeah, I think there's probably just no way to try to make an attack on these two guys here, here. So let's try and hit here and here and see what we can do against the Romanians. So here we're showing a 310 stack. Let's bring in a couple of units from here to reinforce this. And here we've got a 2-2-1. So let's bring in a rifle division to reinforce that. So they'll go in there and see what can we get on this guy here. He's defending with 8 factors. Now this looks pretty good here. We've got 27 attack factors going on there. We can get a couple more units, a couple more non-div units in there. So let's take these 2 in and see how that'll go. And here we have 18 factors. And we can definitely bring in a couple more units here to reinforce that. So that looks pretty good. And how about these Romanians here? Oh, you know, there is one thing that I want to do. Let's take one of these cavalry units. Oop, wrong one. Let's take one of these cavalry units, back it out of this hex, and in its place, I happen to know where we have a Guards Mechanized Corps that's sitting up here. Let's see if we can get them into here. All right, now what's happening with this? And this is a 310. So let's see if we can bring up. Yeah, let's get some artillery. Oh, too much, too much. I think I've overdone it here. I've got an overstack. So let's peel off this rifle division. Get them out of there. All right, so I'm not going to go any farther up the line. You know, from the Romanians, we could be attacking Italians and Hungarians. We could go up on the line, but I think this is good enough to get an example of how this is going to work. Now I can click up here, and it'll show me all the units that haven't moved yet. So there's clearly a lot more that I could do if I were really paying attention and trying to do smart moves here. But for this demo, that's good enough, so we won't worry about that. And we'll go ahead and in the movement phase for the surprise turn, and that takes us in to the combat phase. And we'll start down here and see what kind of damage we can do against the Romanians. We'll initiate this attack, almost 7-1 here against these guys. Note, by the way, that I made the decision, at least for the time being, maybe I'll change it, that during the Soviet surprise attack turn, no defensive air support is allowed. So it gives the Soviets pretty much of a free hand here. And just for the heck of it, because we have a lot of air support available, let's just throw in 4 of them here. We're not going to bother looking at all the details of exactly how the odds get calculated and how the die gets rolled and everything. We'll just go ahead and resolve combat, and not surprisingly, we end up with a DE. And so to conduct the advance here, we don't want to advance anybody from the 39th, but we'll take everybody from the 1st to go in. So that's there. Now let's see what happens up here at the other end of the Romanian line. If we go here and here, and we initiate the attack, almost a 3-1, we have tons of air power available. There are 10 Romanian factors in there. So let's see what happens. We can get in with about 28. I'm just throwing these in without doing any math, and we don't care about that. We'll resolve the combat. Good, we got another defender eliminated. Good, if you're a Soviet commander anyway. We'll click here to do the advance, and now we'll have to think about this. So let's leave the rifle divisions holding the position, the rifle brigade, the construction brigade. We'll send in the artillery. Well, we don't need the siege artillery. We'll leave that behind. We'll send in the tank corps and some rocket artillery to conduct the advance into here. All right, so now we have these Romanians surrounded. And let's see what we can do against this guy. Again, we have tons of air power to throw into this. So let's just do 12 factors here and see what happens. Defend or retreat. Now, to conduct the retreat, there's really no place to go for a guy who doesn't have a cadre. Now, we can give it a try. We can see what happens. If we say we want to retreat him into here, it's going to say, he was eliminated due to an enemy zone of control. So that guy is gone. If we want to conduct our advance, then we want them all in. So we'll conduct that. Let's attack here and initiate. We've got almost 4-1, 6 factors. Let's throw in, what do we need there? 24. We're going to throw in 7 to bump that up a bit. It's nice having almost unlimited air factors to throw in for support when you know there's going to be no DAS. So we got another defender eliminated, and in order to advance, we'll take all those guys and advance them in. So, boy, the southern wing of the Soviet offensive went off really well. It was a bad day to be a Romanian. All of them eliminated on the southern wing of Stalingrad in the Soviet surprise attack turn. All right, now these guys are too strong, cross the river, we'll leave them alone, but we've got 3 hexes on this guy, so let's give this a shot and see what happens. We'll initiate combat here, 8-1. I think that's probably going to be sufficient. We won't even bother with any air power. Now let's see what happens. DE, those guys were mostly cadres, so they're all destroyed. Let's look to conduct our advance. And I think we only want the 26th to go in. So not the 7th, not the 48th. Conduct the advance. There we go. Now, as we look along the front here, nobody's attacking there. These were going to be too tough. We didn't bother with those, but we decided that these two were going to go in here. So let's try this across the Don River, which is why we call it Don42. Not very good, 1.9-1. However, we do have enough that we can put in some air support and see what happens here. When we resolve the combat, we got a defender retreat. And let's send him back to here. And now for the advance, now we have to think about this a little bit because we might not take this hex, and we do want to leave somebody here. We might need to leave somebody in both of those. So from the 11th, we'll leave a couple of guys behind. And then from here, we'll fill that in. We'll put in another division. And how about an anti-tank brigade just for the heck of it? So we'll say those are the ones that we want to advance, and we'll leave everybody else to hold those hexes that they were coming from. We'll conduct that advance. And now when we look up here, we've got this one here and here, I believe. Initiate that attack. We've got 4-1, but let's pour on some air power here, and let's go up to, well, if we put in about 16 factors, we've got plenty. It doesn't matter. We'll put in 16 factors and see what happens. DE, and so we want everybody from the first tank to go in, and we'll leave the cavalry to hold their hex on the other side of the river. So we'll say none of the cavalry. We conduct the advance here. They're in, and then we had one more attack because we weren't going to bother with anything else. We weren't going to look in the Transcaucasus. This is just a demo of this small area here. We will go in here. This And this, I believe, is what the plan was. We'll initiate the attack, and we don't have very good odds there. But we have a ton of air power, so I'm just going to put in all the remaining air factors. Now, obviously, I've used every single Soviet air factor just in this small area here, and so that's kind of an overwhelming amount of air power, especially when the Axis player is not allowed to use defensive air support. So don't look at this as necessarily what the real offensive would look like if it were played out carefully. On the other hand, I'm basically just throwing Soviet units into the attack without trying to optimize the odds and put the right units in the front to make the right attacks in the right places. So it all kind of comes out in the wash for the demo here. So I'll uncheck that. We'll resolve the combat. Got a defender eliminated for the advance. Let's see, who do you want to go into that hex? We've got some cavalry, we've got some this, we've got some tank corps, we've got the guards mechanized. Now we need to leave somebody, normally we want to leave somebody back in that hex, but following the surprise turn, we're going to get another Soviet turn. So the Axis player won't be able to do anything. So what I'm going to do is just leave out the 11th and send everybody from the 15th in like that. And the Axis player won't be able to do anything there because the Soviets will have another move to cover that hex. All right, so I think we've done all of our attacks. Now we could say, show me all the units that haven't attacked yet. Well, there are a ton of them, but you know, and obviously if we went down the front and looked to see what was happening down, whoops, I went too far, down into the Transcaucasus, nothing has happened down there. But you know, this is good enough to see what's going on here. So let's end the phase, and that now ends the Soviet surprise turn that opens the game. So we'll close that. And here the Soviet rail cap was reduced due to the loss of Rostov. This actually happened months ago, and because this is built on what was happening in Blue 42, the system is just now saying, oh yeah, look, Rostov is no longer in Soviet hands, so it's reducing the rail cap. It's true of Rostov, Voronezh, and Stalingrad. And so there we go, now into game turn 1. It's the Soviet player turn, the initial phase. The system has rolled for weather. Well, there we go. Zone C is mud. Not sure that's good for anybody. Zone D is mud. G is frost. The C is calm. Not that that matters. Soviet rail cap is 71. We'll close that. Initial phase, reinforcements. So for November 2, 1942, the Soviets are not due to receive any reinforcements or do any conversions, upgrades, or withdrawals. So we'll end that phase. Now we have the supply phase, and all of a sudden we see these brightly highlighted hexes showing up, and that's the supply net for both sides. So let's temporarily hide that panel there so we can get a better look. So the darker reds are the rail element of the Soviet supply net. The pink ones, there's more up here, the pink ones are road elements of the Soviet supply net. Green ones are rail elements of the Axis supply net, and the yellow is the Axis road elements of the supply net. Note the green ones are also rail hexes that have been regauged to the German standard gauge. So for the supply phase, in mud, it's a mess, and this is a mess for multiple reasons for both players, but it's going to make it hard for the Germans to get reinforcements into place where all those Romanians are gone, and there's a big gap down there south of Stalingrad. On the other hand, it's going to make it very difficult for the Soviets to do anything. These combat motorized units here that might have otherwise been able to start flying out here around the Axis, rear of the Axis 6th Army, in the mud, they're not going to be able to go very far, especially because they're going to be out of supply. And this is a pretty bad position for the southern wing of the offensive to be in mud and out of supply. So we bring this panel back up here, and we can see that in mud, the overland supply leash is 3 hexes. So we've got to get to 3 to either a pink or a red for the Soviets and to either a yellow or a green for the Germans. Let's run up the Soviet front really quick, and we can say this guy's out of supply, he's out of supply. All these people are out of supply. Here, this would be 1, 2, 3, 4, too far. The same thing here. I think the Soviets actually need some trucks down here or something. I'm not sure what they need, but whatever it is, they don't have it. So these guys are in supply, and that looks all right. He can trace back that way, so they're good along there. We get into here. Now this is a 1, 2, 3, or a 1, 2, 3. So if you're across the river, you're definitely out of supply. And even along here, out of supply, out of supply, out of supply, out of supply, and all up. So you can see what mud weather is doing for the Soviet supply situation. It's not good. Well, it's also bad for the Germans. This is the roadhead here. So all of these units, all these Axis units, out of supply. So he's in, he's out, out. There, oh, he's actually in. So I won't bother to click on any more of them, but you get the idea that the supply situation is not good for anybody when you roll mud on the November 2, 1942 turn in Don 42. So we'll go ahead now and in that phase, and this, now that we've marked the units that are out of supply, the system will keep track of those, and we'll deal with them each turn. So we end that, and we're back now to the movement phase for the regular game turn 1, November 2, 1942 Soviet player turn. That just gives you an idea of how things are going to look. And before I sign off here, one more thing. Let's look at the dead pile. This is always interesting. So after the surprise turn, bring that down a bit, the Soviets didn't lose a single unit in that offensive. The Germans lost some decent stuff, but mainly the Romanians took it on the chin. So the Axis allies had a really hard time there, and I think that makes sense. But what's going to happen now as these guys try to battle it out in the mud is a pretty good question. Knowing historically what happens to 6th Army, the Axis player might be thinking, although it's not his turn right now, the Axis player might be thinking that he needs to skedaddle back from here, pull the 6th Army back, and avoid getting them pocketed in here. But it's very interesting. This is not quite the same reason I think that the Germans actually continued to hold Stalingrad when it was in a pocket and avoid breaking out. But it is interesting nonetheless that if the Axis player pulls back just a hex or two here and reopens this rail line for the Soviets because they can occupy these hexes, that will clear up the supply problems for the southern wing of the offensive, which is otherwise going to be out of supply due to the sand and the swamp and the major river here. So it's going to be a tough tactical decision for the Axis player to whether they want to try and pull back out of that pocket and open up that supply line for the Soviets, or whether they'll leave units in the pocket and keep that supply line shut down for as long as possible. Anyway, so there you have it. That's just an idea of what I've been doing, playing around with a Dawn 1942 scenario.